Hello and welcome to the first session of playthrough of Panzer's Last Stand, Operation Konrad 2. So we're starting with our first turn, of course, which is the 7th of January, and running through the sequence of play. First we would normally determine weather, then reinforcements, air points, replacements, etc. The weather is determined for the first turn. It is automatically poor. Poor means the visibility is only 1 hex, so shots can only be taken at 1 hex or less, and also the trafficability is poor. Trafficability is poor means that there's a penalty for applied trace through tracks, which are the little thin roads like that one there. Weather's done. Then rolling for air points and replacements. We don't roll for replacements on the first turn, so only air points. So we're going to roll our 2 D6s here. We'll have the reds for the Soviets and the whites for the Germans. So let's put my little soft cup here and see what we get. We get 3 each. 3 each in poor weather means that the Axis gets, the Germans get none, and also the Soviets get none. So that's nice and easy. Finally, if there's any reinforcements, and we don't have any reinforcements on the first turn, so that's our reinforcement phase of the pre-turn done. Next we're on to assignment. We're not going to reassign anything at the moment. Everything is where it should be as far as I'm concerned on this, and whether units can enter or exit support, and again I think we'll stick with what we have. Finally then, we will then need to do, this is before the activations, we will need to organise our allocations for supply for the activations, how many we can activate, etc. So let's do that next. So we have the formation activation display here. We've got our 5 Soviet formations for German ones. There's a fixed allocation of allotments each turn in this scenario, and the allocations are for the Germans 2 primary per turn and 2 secondary. For the Soviets it's 1 primary and 2 secondary. So once we've determined that, we then need to decide what formations are going to be primary activations, which we pick now, and then the remainder will be potentially secondary activations during the turn. So with the Germans having the primary activation, 2 primary activations, I'm thinking that the best ones would actually be the 2 flanks. So here we've got the 5th SS Panzer Division here, and then on this flank here we've got the 711th Division here. Now the 3rd SS here would be useful, I think. However, it's up against the 18th Tank Corps, which is probably the best formations the Soviets have, and so therefore I'm not necessarily going to rely on it to have 2 activations to try and front up against something which is as strong, if not stronger, than itself. Also, it has strung out a bit. It is covering this central section as well, so it's not as concentrated as the 18th Tank Corps, which is essentially just this area here. 3rd SS is across here, so I may do primary activations for the 3rd SS later turns, but I think the flanks, to try and get those flanks going at the start of the game, is the thing to do. So therefore I'm going to take 5th SS Panzer and 711th Division into the primary box, and we reduce those allotments to 0. Then on the Soviet side, who do we want to react to this? I think the unit which could react best, I suppose, actually is 18th Tank Corps here, and could use the 2nd activations. Remember, secondary activations, not primary, tier 2 rather than tier 1, you don't get a 2nd activation. You only get 1 activation during the turn for that formation. We could look at 2nd Met Corps, but again it is rather strung out, and 10th Guard, again quite strung out. The only concentrated one we have is here. We do have the 23rd Rifle Corps, which does have some reserve here. though I don't know, they're not particularly strong. It's a pure infantry formation, so I'm not sure why a second activation would be great for them. They do have some decent support, but no actual sort of offensive hardware there. So I'm going to select the 18th Tank Corps. So all these others are potentially available for the secondary, and we'll reduce the primary activations down. Now we've decided that, we then go on to the first player determination. Now this is given to us in the scenario. It is the Germans with the first player determination. Now I mentioned during the intro that what I was going to try and do is use some of the optional rules about the chit picking, but of course this tier 1 tier 2 kind of interferes with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the chit picking to tier 1 and tier 2. So tier 1s all have to be activated before any tier 2s, so we can make a cup out of the 3 tier 1s and then a cup out of the remaining ones in the secondary. This does mean that you may end up activating a formation with a secondary allotment, so you only have 2. So for example, for the Soviets you've got 4 possible activations here, so you may get one you didn't really want, but I think that's part of the sort of solo thing here. A bit easier with the Germans because they only have 2 formations and they've got 2 secondary activations. It's a bit tough on the Soviets, but I think we'll go with it. However, of course, with the first player determination, that first player determines the first formation anyway. So I think we're going to pick, as the Germans, the 5th SS Panzer. So when we have the chit pick afterwards, we'll only be between these 2 for the next formation, and then the third out of these will be then the next formation. And so the chit picking is fairly limited on the tier 1. On the tier 2 it'll be more interesting. So let's crack on, and we'll be activating the 5th SS Panzer Division here, and let's see how they go. A couple of things to note. Even though it's a Panzer Division, shall I say, there aren't a lot of Panzers. So we have this unit here, this Panzer Battalion here, the 2nd or the 5th, but it only has 1 step. We have the 1st of the 5th, which also has only 1 step. The units below are Panzer Grenadiers. Well, that's motorised. I think these are Panzer Grenadiers. Yeah, so no other red numbers here. The only other red number unit is actually the Aufklärungs, the reconnaissance unit here, which isn't great. I mean, it's a 5 action rating, which is very good, but it's only a 1 as far as and it's up against, well, that's quite a tough unit there. That 7th Mech Corps unit, the Mech Brigade here, is 5 steps in size. It's also a 5 action rating, so it's absolutely more than a match for this Aufklärungs itself. So this is not plain sailing, and as I said with Panzer's Last Stand, is that the Soviets are not a walkover at all here. So this is going to be a very difficult situation here. This will be freer, as the opposition here is Guards Infantry. It is Guards, so it's not rubbish. Also, there is some support here, and if we look over here, we can see there's anti-tank support here of 3. There's only 1 step here, but we also have a red support. It's the red marker of 2 for some SUs here, which are inherent to the Guards division. There's a decent support for these, which will need to be attacked, and we'll go through exactly how you do that. But I think we're starting off here trying to bully this infantry out of the way. We also have some reserve here, which is a little far away from the deployment at the moment, and we don't really want to get involved in the 3rd SS because that's mixing the formations is a very bad idea in BCS. So we'll have to take it through this track to come and bring them forward, but they're kind of in not the most brilliant position to start off with. So the first thing we do with an abnormal activation is we'll flip the HQ over. So that's the HQ we have, and that's now used. We then do some preparation and just look at how the formation is constructed as far as supply goes. So during the preparation we check to see if the combat trains are off map. They are not, they're almost, but not quite. They're actually here underneath, that's the combat trains. We check if the main supply route is not complete. That means, does the combat trains have access to a supply source, which is the edge of the board, and of course they do. Then we decide whether we want the formation to be in prepared defence. And of course we're attacking, so we do not. Prepared defence will help in combat when defending, but it's quite restrictive as far as movement. The HQ can't move. You also can't get full activations possible, only partials with prepared defence, so we wouldn't want to do that. Are we mixed? So does this formation actually have other formations units intermingled? And they do not. It's kind of a general sort of look, and as you can see, 5th SS is here, 3rd SS is here, so there's a clear demarcation. There's no mixing. And are we doing a recovery activation? So are we attempting to reduce the fatigue? The fatigue is 0 at the moment, so of course we don't want to reduce that, because that's as best as we can get, I think. There is a fresh, which is better than this, but I don't think you can restore that during a scenario with recovery. So once we've checked all that, we then go on to what's known as the Snafu roll. Snafu being an American military term for balls ups, I suppose. And this determines what kind of activation we get. So we determine what's known as the Snafu level. And the Snafu level is the activation level, which is full, partial, or a fail. The Snafu is always done on the Snafu table, and that's a 2 dice roll. Yeah. A 7 or more will get us a full. A 3 to 6 is partial, and a 2 or less is fail. Now for 2d6 that seems like fairly straightforward, but we have a table of modifiers which can change the dice roll, of course. We check again, a little bit like the preparation, what is the status of the division. So we check, is it fresh? And we have a fatigue of 0, so no. That would get you a +1 on the dice, but that's not relevant. Does it have a coordination marker? A coordination marker is earned when there's a collision in formations or the HQ has been overrun or jumped, and that would be a negative modifier. Then we check the fatigue level. It's a 0, so that's a 0 modifier. Is it a mixed formation, as in like we did with the preparation? Are there units from different formations nestled amongst each other? And that's not the case. That would be a -1 as well. And then there is a game specific dice roll modifier. Now this would come from the activation display, and for tier 1 primary the die roll modifier is a 0, so that has no effect. So far we've had no change to the dice roll. Then we look at the supply route, and we look at something called the optimal distance. Now this is the distance, I think I went through on the orders, the distance between the HQ and the combat trains, these two. So normally you would need to be 5 hexes away, or from 5 up to 15 hexes away to be optimal distance from the combat trains for the HQ. Now they're stacked together, so that wouldn't normally be an optimal distance. However, if everything's stacked, if the combat trains are stacked and the HQs are stacked on the edge of the board, then that counts. I think because the combat trains are assumed to be off the board, and you can't have them off the board. Well, you can, but not for a sort of normal supply reason. So you get given the optimal distance. So that gives you a +1. We check whether the trains have been in move mode. That's what's known as ghost, as in the other side, and they have not. so that would be a negative, but that doesn't apply. Crossing the streams is the next modifier, and it needs a little bit of understanding here. So the distance between, it won't apply for this, but the distance between the HQ and the combat trains, you need to look at that path between the two counters. And if that path between the two counters crosses the path for another formation's HQ and combat trains, then that's known as crossing the streams, as in the supply route is being crossed or being shared, and that would get a negative modifier, and we don't have that. Finally, are we using tracks? And this is a normal road, so we are not using tracks, and that would be that at the moment would be a -2 for poor trafficability because of the poor weather, but that doesn't apply. We're still on the +1. Now beyond that, only if there isn't actually a main supply route do you then look for further modifiers, and of course we do have a main supply route. We're actually on the edge of the board. So the upshot of this is that it's a +1 to the Snafu table modifier. So let's roll for that, and it's 2d6. So we'll roll that, our soft cup, and we get a 8. So that 8 plus 1 is 9. That's great. That's greater than 7. So that is a full activation. So having established it's a full activation, what does that give us? So it gives us 2 objective markers, and objective markers are markers placed possibly together, which define a 2 hex radius area of which regular attacks can occur. Also, engagements would get a bonus. So here is the objective markers here. So we can use just one and flip over and call it a double objective marker, and that does give extra bonuses as well. And remember, it's a 2 hex radius around. So what we could do is, for example, place it here, and this will cover everywhere with the exception of the mech core. We could split it up so that, for example, we could put one here and then one here, and that would establish objective capability all the way through the front. Now I do want to do something about this big unit here, this 16th Mech Brigade, but I think the forces next door are too weak to do anything, so we're going to, I think, leave the objectives as they are so that we cover everywhere. Also, if the front line happens to go backwards, the 2 hexes beyond would help as well. I think that's probably the places where I want them to go. Okay, so we've established our objective markers. One other thing about objective markers is this recon unit is able to create its own during the turn. If we do that, I'll talk you through it, but that's possible. We get full movement allowance for all the units. Units may voluntarily retreat. That's if they are generally, when they're cut off, you can do a retreat through Zox to try and get out of the situation you found yourself in, though it's not a happy thing to do. We can flip the counters up and down, so we could turn the units onto either of their sides. We can move the combat trains. We can do artillery barrages, which is what I'm thinking of zeroing in on this 16th Mech Brigade for. We can also use air points, although we don't have any this turn. All kinds of combat. There are 4 kinds of combat available. There's the regular attack. There is the engagement, which is between AV units or units which have AV support. There is attack by fire, which is an AV unit doing a barrage, a direct fire barrage. It's pretty much identical to a barrage. And then there is shock attack, which is the capability for an AV unit to kind of like attempt to overrun a unit. So it's a regular attack, but it's not subject to the restrictions of a regular attack, as in you can only regular attack one hex during one activation. Shock attacks are free and easy. You need an AV unit, and the defender must not have any AV. So those are the 4 things you can do, and all of those are available with the full activation. Beyond that, we may declare a prepared defense, although we don't want to. We could be in a prepared defense, of course. If we lose support to any of our units, they can return during the activation, and we can also allow recon units to go into what's known as screen mode. And again, I'll go into that if it becomes relevant. So having placed our objectives, we would now do our activities. So we pick individual units to move and do combat until we've moved and done combat with all of the units that we want to. We then, at that point, will clean up and we do the process of ending the activation. So how are we going to start off here? So I think what we will start off with is that I want to do a barrage on the 16th mech. Well, there's 2 ways you can barrage. There's a suppression barrage. You only need 1 artillery point to do it, and it gives you a +2 during a regular attack on the hex. Or you can do what's known as destruction barrage, which you can take up to 3 points, and you can roll very much in the way of an attack by fire. It's a D6, and you are attempting to just strip step points off individual units, and that's what we want to do. We want to reduce the size of this unit, and then we could possibly consider an attack. The big thing about barrages is that if you do one, you cannot then do the other on the same hex. So if we did destruction barrages, then you couldn't then try and suppress the hex for a regular attack at the same time. So how many artillery points do we have? Well, we look at the counter here for the 5th SS, and it's got that little 4 explosion marker there. We also, and this is its card here, it also has another 2 over here. So that means that it has a total of 6. Now if you had a partial, you'd only get half of those, but we have a full activation, so we get the 6. And I'm using the device that Tabletop's Edge uses. It's very useful. It's just to mark the artillery barrage available with a dice. So we've got 6 points available. So we are firstly going to use 3 points to barrage the 16th Mech Brigade here. Barrages take place with a D6, and the numbers you need to get are dependent on the circumstance of the unit and what the unit is. So we have a unit which is not in a prepared defense. It is in terrain, because this is rolling here, so it is in terrain. It's not in an urban hex, and it's not what's known as a hard unit. A hard unit would be a non-white unit here, either yellow or a sort of yellow-red combination. So the fact that we are firing onto a terrain hex, and that's it, is for artillery is a 4, 5 or 6 to cause a step loss. So it can be quite devastating. So if we then get our dice together, let's roll for the barrage. And we have 2 5s and a 2. So those 2 5s hit, so therefore that 2nd Mech Corps has taken 2 losses out of its 5 available. So we'll mark it with a 3 marker, and that's a decent outcome, I think, of that. Now what shall we do? I think we should start on our attacks on the infantry here. So the first thing I want to do is I note that the 62nd Guards has support here, and we want to remove the support from these units. The support gives them bonuses in combat, and also stops them being vulnerable to things like attack by fire or a shock combat. So we will start off, I think we will actually, on this objective here, we will do an engagement with the support in that hex. Now that support would be a 3-factor unit here, and how you work out the engagement is you roll on the engagement table, but you determine on each side the engagement value. So for the 2nd of the 5th Panzer Battalion here, 2nd Battalion of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment here, we take its AV value, which is a 5, it's pretty good, and its action value, which is a 5, which is excellent, which adds up to 10. We would get a bonus if this was in a double objective zone, but it's not, it's in a single, so we're left with 10. What have we got in defense? So like we took the armor value and then the action rating, we take the armor value of the support over here, which is a 3. That is a 2, but we can use the 3 because it's a higher value. And we then marry it with the action rating of the unit itself, which is a 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. Now the targets dice roll modifiers are different, of course. Are they in prepared defense? They are not, because prepared defense would be marked here. Do they have multiple supports? Now looking at here, they do have 2 support units, so that does give a +1, so that comes up to an 8. And do they have a non-support standoff unit, or are they a non-support standoff unit? And they are not. So that gives us our totals: 10 here, 8 here. So the difference is 2. So we roll the dice and we actually use difference as a modifier. So let's roll that, 2d6, and then we add 2. We have an 8, plus 2 is a 10. And a 10, there is 2 tables on the engagement table, and the one we want is target is support, and on a 10 the result is target drop. This means that the support has been lost in that hex for the remainder of the activation, and to denote it we put one of these markers on the target hex. So the objectives, we can move those markers around. We can use a little arrow, which I'm doing there to denote as we're doing something with that that hex. So what next? Well, we've activated this unit to do that fire event. Now AV units, armor value units, have 2 fire events available, and they still have a second. They can move up until their second fire event, then they have to stop. We could do an attack by fire here to attempt, like the barrage, to reduce the number of steps. But what I think we'll do is we will actually do an engagement. This second engagement should be pretty much the same. It's an action rating 4 defender with the same support, and we're using the same unit. So it should be a +2 again. So let's have a roll on that. A 9. So that comes up to an 11. Now that is significant. So on the table, as we had before, a 10 is a target drop. On an 11, it changes to target loss and drop. So for the hex, it also loses the support. But what also happens is that the unit that provided the support also takes a step loss, actually in the HQ display. So this is the anti-tank unit that was providing the support, and because it performed so poorly, it actually loses that step, and it only has 1 step remaining. So that is actually removed. Note that we do have this other support, but we now lose the multiple support +1 if more of this happens, and also the number is reduced here, the AV value. That being the second fire rate, that unit is now stopped, so it won't be able to move. It would, however, be able to contribute to a combat in what's known as an assist if we wanted to. But let's finish what we're doing with our armor units here. We don't want to be too adventurous with these guys because they only have 1 step themselves, and so if we end up with a very bad roll, it could be it could be tough. We could lose those units. They can be built back, but we could use those. We're on to the 1st Battalion. I think these are meant to be Panthers, and I think these are meant to be Mark IVs. So here with the Mark IVs, we will try on this spot, or maybe we may try over here instead, because if we want to do a combat here, we would we could do here. We would then struggle to do here because we'd need a normal infantry unit adjacent, one with an attack arrow. I think we'll do this one. So we'll do our engagement again, which is 4 plus 5 is 9, versus a 4 plus 2 is 6. So now it's a plus 3. So let's roll for that. That's a 6, plus 3 is 9, and that would be just target drop. And do we want to do another one? Well, we may, well, yes, I suppose we do. And I think if we're looking to fight in these 3 hexes, do regular attacks, then the infantry units here will be used up. Therefore, the next place we could fire is over here, where this objective is. So our final fire event of the Mark IVs of the first Battalion is here, where we again are looking at 4 plus 5 is 3. 4 plus 5 is 9, versus 4 plus 2 is 6. So again, plus 3. That's where I was getting the 3 from. And I'll just move this off and use the arrow. And let's roll that. Plus 3. That is a 5. 5 plus 3 is an 8, and an 8 would be a target drop. So again, we have the same effect, but no loss here. Right. So we have kind of used up these tank units. They can no longer move, and they've used up their fire events. However, let's see what we can do with the infantry now. So, I think first up we will get the pioneers here to attack this hex. In fact, probably that's the last one to do. I think maybe this one is the first to do here. So, underneath this tank unit, this Panzer unit, we have some Panzer Grenadiers, 4 action rating. So we will get them to attack, do an attack on this hex here. And that will be the only attack, this activation on that hex. So on the combat table, it's a fairly simple table, but we have some modifiers to run through. So we have, on the attacker's side, we have the action rating, which was 4, as we saw. Is it a dual mode, or does it have appropriate support? The support is back here. We have red support here, which is appropriate support for a regular attack. So it gets a +1. It is not in a double objective zone. We are not in a prepared defense. We will do a suppression mission. So we'll use one of our artillery points. That will give us a +2, so that's currently a +3. From the 4, that makes us a 7. Do we have an assist? Well, we do have an assist, because we have another infantry unit here, which can assist there and gives us an extra +1. They have to be adjacent to the attacking unit. So that gets us onto an 8 +8. There is no other modifiers. If they were attacking from off map, if they were shock attacking, there would be other modifiers, but that's it. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 on one side. Then the defender is an action rating of 4. Is it supported, or is it dual? It's not dual mode. Dual mode would mean it would need the arrow and the armor value, and it doesn't. And it's not supported because it's had it dropped. So it's still on the 4. On the defender, is it a prepared defence? No, the formation is not on prepared defence. Does it contain 2 or more combat units? No, it doesn't. Does the attack go across hexside terrain? And if we move the unit out, we see no, that's clear terrain. Are they in a terrain hex? And again, if we look, it is not, that's in clear. And does it have a red AV, or is it in an urban hex? And the answer is no to any of that, so there's no other modifier. So the only modifier they have, well, they don't actually have a modifier at all, so it's just the straight 4. So we have an 8 to 4 here, so that means a +4 on the combat table. Again, 2d6. Let's roll. We have a 7. +4 is an 11. An 11, there is a defender retreat, defender lose 1, and then what's known as a mandatory retreat. So 1 step is lost by the unit. It has 3 at the moment, so that's now reduced to 2. And it conducts a mandatory retreat. There are 2 types of retreats. There is situational and there is mandatory. So the, sorry, not mandatory, automatic. So with the situation retreat, there is a possibility the unit won't retreat, and if it does, it will retreat 3 hexes. On an automatic retreat, for a leg unit, which is what it is, we will take it out of the hex, we will flip it over to its unprepared side as it's running away, and then we place it in what's known as the HQ refuge zone. And its HQ is over here, and its refuge zone is within 1 hex, or within the hex of the HQ. So I think what we are going to do, we are going to put it underneath the HQ. It still has the support dropped, but it's not going to, I think, be relevant for this activation anymore. Okay, and as you can see, there's a success there. So the attacking unit then advances in. That's the 3rd Battalion of the 9th SS Infantry Regiment. We leave the tanks behind, because they didn't actually do the assault. And that's a regular attack that has succeeded there. No losses for the attacker. Where next then? So I think we're going to do the second attack here, which is the infantry unit underneath the Panzer unit here, which is the 1st Battalion of the 23rd SS Infantry Regiment, motorised unit, and it has got an action rating of 4. So we're probably going to get a very similar combat here. So we have an almost identical situation here, one exception. This hex has a village in. This is combat affecting terrain, so it gives the defender a bonus of 1. So 8 to 4, like it was before, becomes 8 to 5, so it's a +3 on the dice. We have a 10, very good. So 10 plus 3 is a 13. Now the 13 is a 2 step loss, a D2 on the defender, and a mandatory retreat, automatic retreat. So we get our here, and then this will have to go to the HQ refuge, just down here, and I think we'll put it just by the bridge. We'll also need to flip the unit over. So again, and the pioneers then advance. This still has the temp support dropped here. I played that wrong actually, it's the wrong hex, but I'll do that anyway. It was the pioneers rather than here. Then we will attack here, I think, which is the 1st to the 23rd, now with the support of the 3rd of the 9th as before. This will be an 8 to 4 again, as we have the temporary the support dropped. That will be a +4 on the combat table. An 8 +4 is a 12. That is a 1 step loss, and again the automatic retreat. So that's 2 steps available still, and we will move this to this hex, I think. And again, our infantry unit will move. I got the 2 combats the wrong way around, but the effect is the same. So that's a very effective infantry assault there that's been done, helped along with the artillery and also the panzer regiments there, and we used our last artillery point to do that as well. So what do we have left here? We have this unit here, which I think we should try and go for. This will be a much tougher attack. So we'll get the 1st 24th, 1st Battalion, the 24th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, and so we will get a lot in defence now. So we have 4. Let's calculate it full again. We have the action rating of 4 +1 because of our Jagdpanzer, sorry, support. So that's 5. We don't have any artillery, but we do have an assist. That gives us 6, I believe, yes. Now, in response, this is an action rating of 4. There is no support because we had it dropped by the Panzer IVs here, this Panzer Battalion here. So therefore it's a 4. However, it is in terrain, I think. Yes, it is in terrain. So that becomes a 5. And also it's behind the stream, which is also hexside terrain. So it becomes a 6. So it'll be a 6 versus 6. So this is a 0 modified attack. So this is not a great attack, but I think we need to get going. We get an 8. An 8 is not terrible, but not brilliant. In fact, no, it's not good. This is an attacker 1 loss. So Panzer Grenadiers take a loss and go down to 5. But it also defines a situational retreat for the defender. So had this hex been in prepared defence, or this whole unit being in prepared defence, it could sit there and take a step loss. As it is, it cannot. It has to retreat 3 hexes towards its HQ, and again flip it over. But it doesn't actually take any losses. 1, 2, 3. So it also means that there is what's known as traffic in the hex, so that's another result from the 8. Traffic is a marker to show that you cannot move through the hex, you have to stop in it, so that goes on there. Now that shouldn't really affect us here. I'm not sure we're going to be moving very much else here at all. So looking at the terrain movement here, and we have 4 movement points here. Because we're going to be moving across tracks, and it's not a good idea to flip over to the truck side because it costs a lot to do that. So we'll be going 1, and then for leg movement on a track, it costs only half a movement point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think we will split the units up. Here we have a 1, 2, 3, and again I think we'll just leave them in a line here. So this is our exploitation. This is the 10th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, which will do the exploitation now. And that's what I think all we want to move for the first activation, or we're hoping for a second, for the 5th SS Panzer Division. We could try and move the HQ and the combat trains, but there's no real scope for doing that, so they're going to stay where they are. And finally we'll be on to the cleanup. So objective markers are removed. Traffic markers are removed, and also temporary support drop markers are removed. Only if the unit actually has what's known as a safe path, i.e. it can actually get back to its HQ, but of course these can. So the upshot of the activation is that there's been a massive combat here, some bombardment and a small advance across the stream here, and this regiment, Guards Regiment Infantry, have retreated back towards the city here, or the town. I think it might actually be a city. Yes, I think it is. It's a city here. The next thing we do is we check any fatigue increase for the formation. Now, fatigue is done on a single dice roll. If you do an activation without even any objective markers, then you don't need to roll. If you have placed objective markers but not done any combats, then it's on a 1. You will get an increase fatigue of 1. If you've done any engagements, attack by fires, or if it's a second activation in which anything, well, the fact that you had a second activation, then it would be a 1 or a 2. If you actually did full regular attacks, then it's a 1 to 3. The only other thing is if there is a voluntary HQ retreat, that's a voluntary one, so that would be an automatic fatigue increase, but that's not relevant here. So we have done full combats here, so it's a 1 to 3 to see if the fatigue increases. That's a 4, so no fatigue increase, it stays as fatigue 0. Okay, we now check to see if there is any isolation. So any of these 5th SS units do not have a safe path to the HQ, and they all do. If they didn't, they would take a step loss. So that's the first activation done. Now there's a possibility that you could have a second activation because it is actually a primary allocation here. We need to then check to see if we get the second activation, if we want one. I think we do. We now have a sort of gap here, if you like, where the reserves can push through. As I went in through the intro, we roll against the dice roll number here, which is a 4. So a 4, 5 or a 6 will cause a second activation. If we were fresh, which we're not, that would be a +1. So we roll for that. We get a 2, so there is no second activation. That's rather unfortunate, but anyway, we have completed the 5th SS Panzer Division's activations for the turn, and we turn the HQ upside down. One last thing that we should really do is the fact that the 62nd Guards Division took 1 or more step losses during this activation. This means that that formation is actually now spoiled. It was not a tier 1 primary allotted activation, so it's put into the spoiled unused box of tier 2. It will get an activation. It doesn't require a secondary allocation, but it's a very weak one. Their Snafu die roll modifiers are -2. They don't get a second activation either, and they can't recover. So that's their restriction. So until the next activation, bye for now.